We're going to start off with the basic ingredients for making our house meat sauce or bolognese sauce. We have a half recipe scaled out here, which is going to yield us about 25 gallons. Meat mixture, 25 pounds of ground beef, 20 pounds of ground pork. Goes through the 3/4 inch hole. Nice large pieces of meat. Make sure you have the right ratio. Oftentimes we have a lot of extra beef scrap. We don't use the right ratio of 25 pounds of beef to 20 pounds of pork. Becomes a problem. The pork adds a lot of fat and flavor to the sauce. 3.5 cans of tomato paste. The grind is very important. This is your onion, carrot, garlic, celery, parsley stems, a little bit of pancetta, banana pepper, and poached mushroom. All gets ground together through the finest plate. And this is going to be the base for our sauce. We call this the Battuto. This is what seasons and flavors the olive oil and starts developing all the flavors in the skillet. 4 pounds of butter, 4 quarts of cream, a little bit of red wine, all of our dry spices, salt, pepper, basil, a little bit of hot seed, and fresh thyme. Our 100% olive oil. And the 9 cans, which is 1.5 cases of chef's cut tomato strips. These have been ground through the 1/2 inch plate. So this is a perfect thing to have your prep guy set up for you. 1.5 cases of tomatoes ground through the 1/2 inch plate. Measure out all your dry spices, your wine, pull your butter, your cream. They can make the grind for you. Have everything set up so you can put the recipe together. We'll move over to the big steam kettle and we'll get the meat sauce going. So for the meat sauce, we're going to start with our 2 cans, which is 6 liters total of 100% olive oil. We'll pour these into the skillet as it's heating up. Have to be very careful when you're cooking in these steam jacketed kettles because it's hard to regulate the heat. It takes a long time for them to heat up, but once they get hot, it also takes a long time for them to cool down. So we often end up overcooking our sauces, bringing them to the boiling point where they break and separate because it's very hard to regulate the heat. You don't get the instant gratification that you would in other pieces of equipment once you turn them down. This retains a lot of heat inside the jacket, so it continues to cook at a very high temperature for a long period of time. We're going to go ahead and add our Battuto and what we call our grind. We just don't want to have anything clumping together, so it's not a bad idea to get in here with a whisk. Just make sure that it's all loosened up. We'll notice a lot of steam coming off this in the beginning, and as the vegetables cook and all their moisture is cooked out, the steam will get less and less and less, and that's a good indicator as to when this is fully cooked. And we also watch the sides of the kettle also, looking for the color of browning and just the blonding of the vegetables on the garlic. You don't get a lot of caramelization, obviously, in a steam kettle, but you will see some browning here on the edges, and we want to be careful about that. It's going to take about 15 minutes or so for this to start to cook. We'll check back in on it in a minute. You can see the Battuto cooking with the meat sauce. Very intense boiling and bubbling. Lots of steam being given off, indicating all the moisture is being cooked out of the onions, celery, carrots, parsley. As this continues to cook, it will get less and less steam will be obviously given off because there'll be no moisture left, and that's what we're looking for. We probably have about another maybe 5 or 7 minutes. You can see all this steam that's being given off. You'll notice as we get ready to add the meat to it, how much this will diminish. You'll notice you'll start to get some caramelization on the sides of the kettle here where there's no liquid. It's very hot, so you actually will get a little bit of browning. I'll just try to make sure I push that garlic back down into it because I don't want that to caramelize, overcook, and become bitter. So as you're in here stirring it and you splash that garlic and that mirepoix or Battuto up onto the sides of this kettle, just spend a little bit of time making sure you push it back down in the liquid because it can sit on the side and scorch and make your sauce a little bit. As we come back to the meat sauce, you can actually see there's almost no steam left. Very, very small amount cooking off the Battuto. That tells me that almost all the moisture is cooked out of that. You can see a nice, beautiful golden brown color around. We'll start adding our meat to this and browning the meat inside the kettle. So all I want to do is just very lightly get this meat covered with the oil. I don't sit in here and destroy it and break it into smaller pieces. I just want to break up the clump. As it starts to warm up, it'll be a little bit easier to handle, but try to keep the meat covered with the oil. As we come back to our meat sauce, we want to make sure the meat is fully cooked at this point. So without being too aggressive with it, I'm just going to pull it out, take a look at it. I can tell by touch and by looking at it, I don't see any more blood red pieces of meat. The meat is almost fully cooked at this point. What I'm going to do is add my spices. I don't want to cook these spices for more than about a minute or 90 seconds, but this will help them evenly get dissolved and spread throughout the sauce when I add them at this point, and it will also help rejuvenate their flavors. So we're going to add all of our dry spices. We'll add our red wine, and I'm going to start adding my tomato paste. This recipe, different from the tomato sauce, we add the tomato paste first because it'll be much easier to dissolve this paste into the sauce when it goes in first. Again, we want to keep the integrity of the large pieces of meat in the sauce. So the less stirring we have to do, the better. Once all the tomato paste goes in, I'm just going to lightly stir it. Start to let that dissolve here into the sauce. Then I'm going to go ahead with my tomatoes and my water. This will actually help promote a little bit of sweetness in the sauce also by cooking this tomato paste just for about a minute to 2 minutes. I'm going to go ahead with my ground tomatoes. I'll use the water that I've pre-measured to rinse these buckets. I have my pre-measured amount of water being added to the sauce. It's very important that you use cold water because we need this sauce to basically emulsify. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and lightly stir all of this together. So the tomatoes, because I prepped this sauce yesterday, the tomatoes were actually cold from being in the refrigerator. I used cold water. The tomato paste was at room temperature. So the temperature of this pot quickly dropped from being at a full boil to now being probably only around 80 or 90 degrees. And that's very important because you can see all this oil now that's floating on top of the sauce. I want to make sure that this sauce continues to emulsify. So I'm going to add my diced butter at this point when everything is cold, because as this sauce continues to heat back up, it's going to slowly melt that butter back into the sauce and it will slowly emulsify. If this sauce comes to a full rolling boil, it will break and separate, and you will forever have that fat on top of the sauce and it will look like it's broken. So you can see just by slowly stirring it, that oil gets mixed right back into the sauce. As soon as I start to see a little bit of boiling on the edge of the kettle, I'm going to immediately turn it down to around 6 or 7 so I can control the heat and make sure I get a good even cook on it. One important aspect of whenever you add cream to a sauce is making sure the cream is tempered, meaning you have to have the cream and the sauce at the same temperature. So what I'm going to do is add my 4 quarts of cream into a bucket, and I'm going to drain some of the sauce from the gooseneck where all the oil and brine got stuck. And I'm going to use that to temper this, i.e. heat it up, so that I can add it back to the sauce so they're at the same temperature. And I'll show you how to do that. The problem is we like to take these, we put them in the pasta cooker, we put them in the steamer, we get these hot, we don't emulsify it with the oil from the neck, and then emulsify it back into the sauce. So every time we try to shortcut it, we're going to compromise the quality of our sauce. So as we are tending to our meat sauce, about 7 or 10 minutes have gone by. You can see almost all the butter has melted itself into the sauce. But if you look really closely at the edge, you can see it's starting to boil. So this is the point exactly when I need to turn the kettle down. There's so much residual heat in this jacket that it's going to continue to cook and come to the boil. If I don't catch it and turn it down now, it's going to be at a full, vigorous, rolling boil. We don't ever cook anything at a full rolling boil except for pasta. So it's very important that this sauce comes to the boil, but it's very important that this sauce does not boil. And that's what I'm saying. When you go to catch it, it's going to be too late. So if I can catch it now, make my adjustment, turn it down, you can see I've already turned it down. It's still getting good action. It's still starting to bubble on the edges, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm going to make sure that all this butter has been melted. At this point, we're going to cook the sauce probably about 30 to 40 more minutes. Once it comes to a full boil, no more than 30 or 40 minutes, otherwise the tomato sauce can become bitter. So we're going to just catch it. We're going to keep playing with this. Most of your kettles, probably right around 7, is the optimum cooking temperature. So we're going to just play with it and make sure that we're at a nice, comfortable. Once I see it bubbling all the way around the edges, I'm starting to get bubbles in the center, even though I've already turned it down, then we'll know we're at a good cook temperature. So we'll go ahead and drain the neck. So as we mentioned, I put my cold cream here inside the bucket. I'm going to slowly open this gooseneck. All that oil from my Battuto, you saw that squirt out in the beginning. Now I've got some of my meat sauce coming out that has come to the boil. So all that hot sauce getting mixed with this cream is going to raise the temperature of the cream. So now I can safely add it to the meat sauce without it breaking or curdling. I have my tempered cream, usually a 2-man job. I'm going to slowly pour this into the sauce while it's being stirred, so that I can incorporate it into the sauce. If I pour it in too quickly, it's not going to emulsify, so it has to be slowly drizzled back into the sauce. So look at the sauce. Now everything has fully been added to the sauce. All the ingredients are in. Beautiful color. Look at the top of the sauce. No fat separating out. Has a perfect texture to it. Just want to be careful a little bit here on the sides. You'll see you start to get, again, when you stir the sauce and splash it up the sides, it's not uncommon that some of that's going to stick to the sides and start to scorch. So this is where I want to control my temperature. Just keep it at a nice, that's what I want to see, gentle bubbles breaking the surface. You can see a little bit of fat will start to separate out, but as soon as I stir the sauce, it absolutely comes right back together. We don't want to do a lot of stirring. Every time we stir it, we continue to break up those pieces of meat. So keep that in mind. And never ever do we cook this with a whisk, or especially in the morning when we go to heat the sauce up. Oftentimes I see guys with a big whisk in their pot as they're heating up the sauce. Well, guess what's going to happen? All these pieces of meat right here, as you're heating it up with a whisk, are just going to break them all up, and you're going to end up with finely ground beef. And that's just not what we're looking for. As the meat sauce is simmering, you're going to see that it starts to separate a little bit. There'll be a little bit of oil that forms on the top, a little bit of scum that forms. But because it's cooking at a nice, perfect, gentle simmer, all I have to do is just stir the sauce, and it quickly emulsifies itself right back together. But when we talk about cooking the sauce until the fat rises to the top, that's what we're talking about. So as we go to adjust the seasoning, I'm going to take a small ladle. Look at those big, beautiful chunks of meat that are floating in the sauce. The sauce is very hot. Obviously, it's boiling, but that's what we're looking for. Nice, beautiful texture. You can see the pieces of meat and tomato. As we noted, every time I make meat sauce, follow the recipe exact. It's always a little more addition of salt in order to get the recipe correct. So I'm going to add just a little bit more salt to it. Just going to sprinkle a little bit of salt into the sauce. Again, you can see the fat. The sauce, I know the sauce is ready because the fat is rising to the top.